I'll put it on you,
So the vacant British heavyweight title fight between Fraser Clarke and Jeamie TKV, promoted by Ben Shalom's Boxer, will no longer be taking place on that October 25th date, next Saturday. And this is because Jeamie TKV has had to pull out due to an injury. Due to this untimely postponement, this fight will no longer take place on the same night as the DAZN pay-per-view event, headlined by Joseph Parker and Fabio Wardley, an event being promoted by Frank Warren's Queensberry Promotions. And I'll be real, I sense something fishy here. So Fraser Clarke vs Jeamie TKV was meant to be the first boxing event on the BBC in 20 years. Ben Shalom's Boxer just signed a deal with the BBC after Sky Sports chose not to renew their deal with Boxer. Well, of course, Clarke vs TKV will still be the first Boxer on BBC event, just on a new date now. But either way, it will no longer be taking place on October 25th. Now, Boxer signing a deal with the BBC is big in the sense that free-to-air boxing is good for the public appeal of the sport. And the fact that the inaugural Boxer on BBC show was to be happening on the same night as another bigger heavyweight fight taking place in the UK that is on pay-per-view was causing a lot of discussion in the British boxing media. It was quite a big story. But to me, the Parker vs Wardley card really shouldn't be on pay-per-view, so I found the clash of these two shows to be really interesting, from a different perspective to what the DAZN shills who dominate the British boxing public were spewing. But now that Jeamie TKV has been forced out of this fight with Fraser Clarke due to an injury, thus resulting in that October 25th BBC show being axed completely, that Parker vs Wardley Queensberry show that is questionably behind a pay-per-view paywall will now conveniently no longer have to compete with a free-to-air British heavyweight title fight. So let me just cut to the chase. As I heard the news that Jeamie TKV was being forced out of the October 25th fight due to injury, I was literally in the middle of writing a script for a video that was about the fact that the Parker vs Wardley fight was to be clashing with the Clarke vs TKV fight, as those of you who follow my community posts will know. In that video, I was expressing how impactful of a move causing this clash could have been from Ben Shalom. I was theorising about if this move was intentional from Ben Shalom and what the motives could have been if it was. It was stuff to do with reviving free-to-air boxing and pushing against the excessive use of the pay-per-view model. The video was going to be called "To Boycott Pay-Per-View," and this image on screen was going to be the thumbnail. I know it's convenient to act like a video that has to be scrapped or can't be posted was going to be this revolutionary video, but I do feel like that video would have been big. It was nuanced and had some very intricate points in there. But forget about me. More importantly, if the Clarke vs TKV fight happened on the same night as Parker vs Wardley, that could have been somewhat revolutionary for British boxing TV for reasons that I was going to touch on in that video. All of the intangibles that I was analysing in that script were all in the context of these two fights taking place on the same night, so a lot of what I was going to say is irrelevant now. Well, the video concept as a whole is now irrelevant, but let me summarise what I was going to say in the video to outline what the benefits could have been if Clarke vs TKV was to happen on the same night as Parker Wardley. Points about why these two fights clashing would have benefited those on the side of the Clarke vs TKV fight and Boxer more might sound like mute points to the dedicated boxing fan because of how much bigger the Parker vs Wardley fight is. But we've got to look at the bigger picture because most people are not dedicated boxing fans. So I wrote about how the Parker vs Wardley pay-per-view fight was already announced nearly 3 weeks before Clarke vs TKV, and that's why the boxing media thought that it was a silly move from Ben Shalom to put Clarke vs TKV on that date. I was touching on Boxer's BBC deal a bit, talking about how Sky didn't renew their deal with them, and that they now have this BBC deal with 4 TV slots a year. I then wrote about how Ben Shalom and Frank Warren have the fiercest rivalry out of the major boxing promoters in the UK, and how this clash could have been a strategic move from Shalom to take potential buyers away from the Parker vs Wardley fight. I then acknowledged that as true boxing fans, we just want to be able to watch the fights first and foremost, so fuck the petty beef between promoters. A lot of us were just pissed that we might not be able to watch both of these fights live. But then I was going to mention that if the intention in this schedule clash from Shalom is to go against Frank Warren's pay-per-view show with his free-to-air show pretty much, then I am more so interested in that move from Shalom than I am dismayed that I won't get to comfortably watch both of these shows live. I then started to touch on how Frank Warren was grilling Ben Shalom in a TalkSport interview, saying how we'll only have to talk about Ben Shalom 4 times a year now, because that's how many TV slots the BBC have given him. And I mentioned how Warren outlined the levels between the two clashing heavyweight main events in that interview, by reminding us that Fabio Wardley, and I quote, poleaxed Fraser Clarke in their rematch. And there is no disputing that. Of course, Warren would have had the strongest words about the schedule clash, as he is the one putting on the Parker vs Wardley fight. But I then referenced what other DAZN affiliated voices who might have not been as biased as Frank Warren, but still protective of DAZN pay-per-view, had to say, mainly Eddie Hearn and Adam Smith. So Eddie Hearn and Adam Smith, in separate interviews, were both acknowledging how Boxer being on the BBC is great for the public appeal of the sport. But they both also said that Parker vs Wardley is the fight for the true boxing fan to watch, and that boxing behind the paywall is for the hardcore fan basically. A decently sized audience of casual boxing fans or non-boxing fans might just tune into Clark vs TKV because it's completely free. And they were basically saying that Clark vs TKV being on free TV will not take any viewers or buyers away from Parker Wardley. So the consensus that I got from DAZN guys is, good on Ben Shalom for getting a BBC deal, but putting his first BBC show on the same day as Parker vs Wardley is silly from him, and it will only mean that the hardcore boxing fans will not be tuning into their first BBC show, Frazier Clark vs Jeamie TKV, so Shalom should have chose a different date. In that script, I then went on to corroborate talks about the levels between the Parker vs Wardley fight and the Clark vs TKV fight by just outlining some obvious things about the fighters in question. I then spoke about the pay-per-view model being overused in boxing and about how all of the fans complain about pay-per-view. But when a fight like Usyk vs Fury is on pay-per-view, even if you are against the pay-per-view concept all round, you're hardly going to use a fight like that as a means to cry about the pay-per-view model. But a fight like Parker Wardley being on pay-per-view with a shit undercard does indeed highlight how boxing fans get extorted, especially on DAZN over here in the UK. So putting the inaugural Boxer on BBC show on the same night as that is making a statement. Fuck me, just reading all this back now. Boy did I write a lot here. I then went on to say that despite there being a good bit of truth to what the DAZN guys such as Eddie Hearn and Adam Smith were saying, amongst other less recognisable DAZN employees so to speak, well, Eddie Hearn spoke about this whole thing in a few different interviews I think, which I so can't be fucked to find and rewatch, especially because these interview channels love posting hour-long interviews without putting timestamps on them, so it's going to be so long to find Eddie Hearn's comments on what I'm looking for. I know the reason that these channels don't do timestamps, and it's not down to laziness like most people in the comments of those videos seem to think, but it is annoying either way. But anyway, as far as I remember, they were a bit extreme with acting like literally no hardcore boxing fan is going to watch Clark vs TKV. They're all going to pay the DAZN fees for the Parker Wardley fight, instead of watching a decent level British heavyweight title fight on free TV, just because Parker Wardley has more direct world title shot implications. But I suggested that at least some dedicated boxing fans would rather watch Clark vs TKV than pay the extortionate DAZN fees for Parker Wardley. Then I was obviously going to address the elephant in the room about illegal streaming, and I also acknowledged the fact that the Clark vs TKV fight may very well have started and finished before the Parker vs Wardley main event started, so people may very well have been able to watch both main events live on the night, and they wouldn't be missing out on too much by missing the Parker Wardley undercard. That Clark TKV fight is bigger than any fight on the Parker Wardley undercard. Plus there's a large contingency of British boxing fans who only really care about heavyweight boxing, unless it's like Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn or something. So a lot of people would have just been watching the two main events on October 25th. So for the fans who flip-flop between buying pay-per-views and illegally streaming the pay-per-views, which dare I say probably describes most of us, and most of us probably only pay for the massive fight, and even then we don't pay for those all the time, the likes of us will only not pay for this Parker Wardley card because it's not pay-per-view worthy, but if we're going to be switching channels and not watching the whole pay-per-view card, that's even less incentive to buy the pay-per-view. I referenced a little poll that I did on my channel about how many people are going to illegally stream the Parker Wardley fight. These figures only represent a small sample size because I am small time of course, but this shows that most of you will be dodgy streaming the fight. So from that I said, if on October 25th, forget about how many people watch Parker Wardley, if the pay-per-view buys are extremely low for Parker Wardley and the ratings for Clark vs TKV on BBC 2 are sky high, it could be a wake-up call for the powers that be to stop abusing the pay-per-view model, and it could help encourage completely free-to-air boxing. I kept covering my tracks in the original script by not outright saying that I illegally stream myself, and I was giving disclaimers about the fact that I was not encouraging illegal streaming, but fuck it, I'm too irrelevant to actually get in trouble for that shit, so who cares. I'm not irrelevant enough to get targeted with unfair copyright claims though, mind you, but to be fair, that can happen at literally any level of content creation. I then went on to say that I am of course aware that because of how much money you make per viewer, being absolutely smoked in terms of the number of legal viewers by a fight on Freeview, it's still definitely not an incentive for the big promoters to stop robbing fans with pay-per-view costs and subscription fees. Wasserman Boxing, who broadcasts on Channel 5, have been the Freeview boxing leaders of late, and they've pulled in like 1.5 million viewers with mediocre fights that no one's really fussed about, but obviously people just go onto the channel because it's free. But Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn, that being their first fight, did like 600k pay-per-view buys. And that's the upper echelon of pay-per-view popularity. Other pay-per-views get buying figures so low that they are not revealed. They probably get under 100k buys. But again, with how much money they make per customer with the pay-per-view model, it's still worth it for the big promoters. Or maybe DAZN want to charge so many pay-per-view fees because they're not in profit yet and they're trying to become in profit, who knows. But I said that if a massive point is made by the fans on the 25th of October and the Parker vs Wardley buys are at an astronomical low for a DAZN pay-per-view event and the Clark vs TKV pulls in well over 1 million views on BBC Two, then that might make some difference to boxing paywalls in the UK as we know it. Maybe. And even the slight chance of it had me kind of excited. After that, I went on to do this little bit about the Wardley vs Clark rivalry, and saying how it is fair to use what Wardley did to Clark in the rematch as a signifier of levels, but lest we forget their first fight in which they fought to a 12-round draw. I then went on to talk about how Clark was outboxing Wardley in fight 1, and I was given a little analysis from that fight, talking about how you could score that fight as wide as 116 to 110 in Clark's favour. And I was saying how me rewatching Wardley vs Clark 1 is just another reminder of how much of a mismatch Parker vs Wardley is in favour of Parker. And then after writing that whole bit, I found out about the rumours of the TKV injury. I knew it was over. And I had a really bad cold that night as well, so I just said fuck it and went to bed. Did a little community post first actually. In that scrapped video, I was then going to talk about Boxer as a promotion all round, not just in the context of this schedule clash, but all things Ben Shalom and Boxer. I was going to talk about their roster, and I was going to talk about fighters leaving them lately and stuff. And I was going to talk about them losing the Sky deal. And I was going to theorise about who could be the flagship fighter for Boxer now that they are on the BBC with 4 shows a year. I was then going to do this epic rant about DAZN and get things off my chest that have been grating on my heat-oppressed brain for months. And then I was going to round up on a bit about pay-per-view as a whole, not just DAZN pay-per-views. Mate, that video is going to be sick, I tell ya. Would have got me out of the hood, but it is what it is. So now to stop reminiscing on my little shit video that never was, let me say why I think Jeamie TKV got conveniently injured. Look, Frank Rowan can laugh off Ben Shalom and Boxer all he wants. The DAZN puppets can act like Ben Shalom is a retard for putting on a free British heavyweight title fight on the same night as a rip-off pay-per-view. But let's be real, those guys are protecting DAZN paywalls and spinning a narrative that, to prove you're a hardcore boxing fan, you've got to let us rinse you of your money pretty much. And I know that Warren was low-key paranoid about that free fight taking away potential pay-per-view customers. So it's either one of two things here. Either Frank Rowan sent people to go and get TKV injured, which I doubt. I'm of the belief that the injury is fake due to the lack of clarity on it and because of something else which I'll get to. Or Frank Rowan paid off Jeamie TKV to fake the injury. That's the more likely scenario here. Frank Rowan paid off Jeamie TKV to fake an injury so that the inaugural Boxer on BBC event got axed and his shaky pay-per-view didn't have to compete with a free-to-air fight. It was revenge for the schedule clash and a lot of other things, and there was nothing we could do about it. Warren was a made man and Shalom wasn't, and we had to sit still and take it. Or maybe Warren just made a threat to TKV to pull out of the fight with an injury. They call him Bricktop, don't they? Maybe he threatened to feed him to the pigs. It's either that or he made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Alright, now let's be real, that is a bit far-fetched. That's possibly driven by my personal grievances with DAZN, mixed with my disappointment that this schedule clash didn't play out, and that I had to axe my little shit video in which I fantasised about how that schedule clash could have been beneficial for boxing fans in the long run. But I'ma say now, things like that can happen. Boxing has been a dirty game. We can't always rule things like that out and shut them down as delusional conspiracy theories. But in this instance, there are a couple of other potential reasons for this fight's untimely postponement that are more viable. So cool. I was completely taking the mick when I said that Warren could have sent someone to injure TKV. But there is a slight chance that the paying him off thing could be true. Slight chance. But above all, I do believe that Jeamie TKV's injury is fake either way. So right away, as soon as there were talks about a TKV injury, before the postponement was officially confirmed, it was just a known thing that the new date for the fight would be November 29th somehow. The same venue would be free for that date, and BBC would give them a slot on that date, and that new date has since been officially confirmed of course. So was it a rib injury, was it a muscle strain, or was it an undisclosed injury? And how was the new date confirmed so instantaneously? The injury thing is obviously bullshit. So the word on the street is that they just weren't selling tickets for this fight, And I'm not really surprised about that because of how lackluster the promotion for this fight has been. The location for this fight will remain the same on the new date, the Valiant Arena in Derby, so if that's the case, hopefully they can do a better job of selling tickets in Derby between now and November 29th. So if the lack of ticket sales is the reason for this fake injury and postponement, then I guess it is what it is. There's nothing else that can really be said. And the lack of ticket sales is the most likely reason for the postponement, not the most likely conspiracy theory, like the actual most likely reason all round, above what is being sold as the truth. So of course, this would be Ben Shalom's doing, as he is putting on the show. Another reason that Ben Shalom might have done this postponement is because he began to realise that perhaps the Clark vs TKV fight won't be able to be competitive amongst the boxing world with Parker vs Wardley at all. That could be true. Maybe my theories about boxing fans possibly wanting to watch Clark vs TKV instead because it's free is pure delusion from my part. Maybe nobody actually gives a flying fuck about this fight. And even then, aside from viewing figures, all of the major outlets within the boxing media have been monopolised by DAZN now, so all of the YouTube channels would have been covering Parker vs Wardley on the night and not Clark vs TKV. There wouldn't have been a peep about Clark vs TKV. And again, to be honest, Boxer have done a bad job of promoting the Clark vs TKV fight, so I'm not out here just having pity on Boxer, or on the participants of that vacant British heavyweight title fight. Some might argue that this fight is actually unpromotable, but I wouldn't go that far. There are things that could be done to sell this fight. Now here's another thing. Ben Shalom's most popular star in terms of social media and all that shit was Ben Whittaker, and Ben Whittaker just left Ben Shalom's Boxer for Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing. Whittaker more than likely left Boxer for Matchroom as Boxer are no longer with Sky Sports and are with the BBC now. There's not much money in the BBC deal, of course. There's no subscription fees and there aren't even adverts on the BBC channels. Ben Whittaker's first fight with Matchroom has been announced for November the 29th, and he's fighting someone who we've never heard of before. So maybe Ben Shalom said, fuck it, I won't be able to compete with Parker Wardley, so let me forget about the beef with Frank Warren for now, and go up against Ben Whittaker's highly criticised Matchroom debut in order to spite him for leaving Boxer. And this new November 29th clash doesn't have all those boycotting pay-per-view implications around it. But the Whittaker fight is behind the paywall of the basic DAZN subscription, or whatever the tier of payment is called, versus the Frazier Clark Jeamie TKV fight, which is on Freeview. And I know which of these two fights that I'm more interested in. The announcement of the Clark vs TKV postponement and the Ben Whittaker Matchroom debut announcement happened around the same time pretty much, so that schedule clash can't be assumed to be as intentional from Shalom as the October 25th one was, but you never know. Shalom could have got an inside scoop about the Ben Whittaker date. There is the possibility that Shalom postponed this fight due to a mixture of all of these reasons as well. They weren't selling tickets, he was not confident in competing with Parker Wardley, and he wants to compete with the Whittaker fight. This rescheduling could be seen as an evil move from Shalom. It would seem like he's fucking his fighters over and disregarding the time that they peak in training for the fight just to serve his own needs. But if he's moving the fight to a date in which he believes there will be more eyes on the fight, then that is ultimately good for the fighter's best interests. If on the off chance Ben Shalom's sole reason for moving this fight is to compete with the Ben Whittaker fight, then that is a slimy move and it is rough for the fighters that the date has to be moved just for his pettiness. But I highly doubt that that is the sole reason here. There is more chance of TKV's injury being genuine. Promoters do tend to be slimy though, so it's not impossible. And there's a good chance that Ben Shalom was originally going to clash with Parker Wardley just to spite Frank Warren, now that his back is against the wall and he is stuck with a BBC deal. But Shalom don't actually care about reviving free-to-air boxing and all that shit, and he'd probably be broadcasting on DAZN if he had the chance. Aside from all that shit, I'll tell you one thing, and I'm not ashamed to say it. My estimation of David Allen as a man just fucking plummeted. That was a very disappointing performance. I know that he's been low volume and all that, but this fight was so winnable, which is why he picked this fight, as I discussed in my pre-fight video. He couldn't even push the action just a little bit more to expose Makhmudov's weaknesses for a period any longer than like 10 seconds. That was the most nauseating fight I've ever watched in my life. You know what I'd do if I were Dave Allen?
I'd go to an island and I'd move there and I'd never box again.
Surely all of the hype behind him and all of the people coming out in droves to see him at the Sheffield Arena would have incentivized him to push the pace a bit more. Here's my thing, if he won, I would have been over the moon for Dave, and if he fought his heart out and gave it his all but got smoked, then hats off to him for the effort. But the fact that he pulled off that shit and people are still up his arse is beyond me. He so clearly could have won that fight if he tried more, but he conned the public with his little humble guy act so he can get paid handsomely for a glorified sparring session, and the marks are still gagging to see him fight again. Not gonna lie, Dave is very smart for cashing in on that shtick. Fair play, I'd probably do it myself. But how complimentary all of the fans have been towards him and his bravery and all of that after his nonchalant losing effort is beyond me. There's no variety of opinion out there at all. You can call him tough for that performance, but we already knew he was tough. You can't call him brave for that performance when he didn't take any risks. He just took shots on the guard like he's been doing it in fights and doing it in sparring with the best heavyweights out there. And this is the issue with DAZN monopolising the content creator scene. Everyone's been sold the dream. Dave Allen got signed to a 2-fight deal with Matchroom after the win over Johnny Fisher. In fight 1 of the deal, he goes up against the big scary Russian Arslanbek Makhmudov, who showed to be very limited in his loss to Guido Vianello last year. Allen fumbles it and just doesn't do enough in that very winnable fight against Makhmudov, which realistically could have made his star power plummet and made people lose interest. He kinda let his fans down. This could have, and dare I say should have, killed the hype and made it very hard for Matchroom to sell his second fight on the deal to the public. But guys are still apparently looking forward to seeing his next fight. And you know why? Because despite everything else going on in boxing, after that loss, all of the voices that dominate the space are theorising about who Dave Allen is going to fight next and talking about how he could still go on and do good things after the Makhmudov loss. Eddie Hearn is laughing at all the absolute peons who are still firmly on the Dave Allen hype train after that loss. Trust me, this is easy money for Matchroom, but I can't be arsed with this anymore, I'll be real. Dave Allen just let Makhmudov box him around in there, so unless he rematches Dillian White next or something, or if he fights in the middle of an undercard, which I am interested in fights that happen in both before and after his fight, I am not watching the guy's next fight. To be fair, the fact that Clinch Mudov was only deducted that second point for excessive clinching in the 12th and final round was lenient towards him, I felt. There's easily a world where he could have already had 3 points taken off him by the 8th round and being threatened with disqualification by that point, because that grabbing shit is not boxing. But either way, Allen didn't do enough. Unfortunately, Allen's loss is a bad look on his training team of Jamie Moore and Nigel Travis as well, because again, even though Allen has been having a low punch output, this was meant to be some new and improving version of Dave Allen under Jamie Moore's guidance. A more in shape version, a more active version, but then he puts on a stinker like that. And look, I'm an utter casual, so I'm never one to talk about trainers and camps. I have no knowledge on Jamie Moore's training methods or anything like that, and I would never want to disrespect or accuse that team of any incompetency at all, and I don't have the knowledge to even touch on it. But just in terms of what we see on TV as British boxing fans, I'm just saying that things aren't looking the best for the team right now, from the outside looking in. Because one Jack Catterall just left Jamie Moore's gym to go and join Bosie Ennis's gym in Philly. Random move. It does seem like Catterall snaked out Jamie Moore and Nigel Travis there. It seems like Jamie Moore and Nigel Travis did a lot for Catterall, just as an outsider again. And lower down the ranks, one Cameron Vong just left Jamie Moore and Nigel Travis to join the ever popular Ben Davidson. This wasn't off the back of his robbery win over Gavin Gwynn, it was after that nice stoppage victory over his undefeated rival Jordan Flynn. So maybe there's a reason that Jack Catterall and Cameron Vong both left that gym, I don't know. One of you more clued up boxing fans are going to have to let me know. Let me just say now, after Allen's piss poor performance, and given that Catterall's last fight against Harlem Eubank, which was under the guidance of the Jamie Moore camp, was a stinker, and the fact that Catterall has been known to be boring all round, if Catterall comes out on smoke against Echo Esserman in his first fight under Bosie Ennis's guidance on November 15th, and just punches up Esserman Philly style, again from the outside, Catterall having a performance like that in his first fight that's not with the Jamie Moore camp is not the best look on the camp. Well, to be fair, Cameron Vong's first fight without Jamie Moore and first fight with Ben Davidson was not impressive at all in my eyes. So maybe these guys are just snaking out the Jamie Moore camp and acting like another trainer will magically improve them when their flaws are just their own faults. And Jamie Moore and them unfortunately just can't catch a break right now. I don't know. I mean, Jamie Moore and Nigel Travis have got Pat Brown, and I reckon that brother's the truth, so hopefully he could do good for that camp. He's looked good in all of his fights so far, I'd say. But yeah, I'm not trying to go too far on this anti-DAZN shit just because of a little copyright claim that was made against me, whatever happened there. But I have actually just been so tired of certain shit lately. DAZN monopolising boxing is not healthy for the sport. There needs to be some sort of competition, which is why I was so excited about the October 25th clash. But to relate this to the copyright claim that was made against me, of course mainstream boxing content in 2025 goes beyond what the official outlets broadcast and post online. The individual content creators make a huge difference in overall fan narratives, and most of the big content creators are DAZN affiliated now. They start independent but become DAZN partners. Look, you see all of these guys on the DAZN payroll, their videos might as well get posted on DAZN's official YouTube channel and they can just get paid a nice wage by DAZN. There's no point in even masking it as their own content anymore. Now, just because a bunch of your favourite YouTubers have DAZN partnerships, it doesn't mean that DAZN are content creator friendly. If they were content creator friendly, they wouldn't target a small content creator with false copyright claims on a film study just because it proves that neither of the Usyk Fury fights were close. This is so they can potentially shove Usyk vs Fury 3 down your throats, and all of your favourite YouTubers will tell you that the first 2 fights were close if that trilogy fight got made. I don't want to sound like some bitter hater. Fair play to the guys making good money with DAZN partnerships. Nothing against any of the individuals. There's only a few of them whose content I keep an eye on, and I only really fuck with one of them, and he's not even from the UK. But either way, none of this is targeted at any individual. It's just that the DAZN narrative all round is too much now. They are monopolising the content creator scene, so now fan narratives are completely lacking in variety unless you go to a corner of the internet where people just complain about everything and everything's some sort of conspiracy. And I can feel myself turning into that right now, to be honest. No, don't get me wrong, there isn't in between. People with medium-sized channels who do good fight analysis and make nice unique videos that do great views, but they don't have any partnerships or sponsorships, and they face copyright issues as well. So let me not be a bitch. But look, let me just say, the DAZN monopoly is something that you don't want. By the way, just on a random one, I didn't realise how close the DAZN offices are to where I live. Well, it's obviously tucked away in some big media house, so no wonder I didn't know. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention that because I found that interesting. If someone happens to break into their offices and smash the place up and then run off into the night, it definitely wasn't me, yeah? Definitely not. Look, I'm kind of just getting tired of hearing what anyone has to say at this point though, I can't lie. That's why I might start focusing more on historical and more unique boxing content, which was my original intention for this channel. But in the last few months I've been really keeping up with everything going on in boxing, and it's just nauseating. Stupid little promotional beefs and speculations about fights that probably aren't even happening anytime soon and all of this other stuff. Look, there is a place for that stuff, but given that I'm not a straight up news channel, I'm not keeping up with all of this bullshit anymore and watching all of these interviews to, stay in the know-how anymore. There's too much content, like this Ring Magazine panel show they're doing now. Leave it out. I'm definitely still going to do some post-fight content for big fights, and other than that, it might just be historical joints. After last weekend, I was thinking to just do a video in which I was going to big up Boots Ennis after his win over Lima, because I do believe that Boots beats any of the champs at 154. And I don't think any of the other 154 pounders could do that to Lima, but I had nothing to say on that fight that anyone else hadn't already said. And I do like doing post-fight reaction videos for more obscure fights that other people don't cover, but like, the views on them, come on. Most people would just shift away from content that ain't doing well without saying anything, but I'm keeping it straight with you guys because there are some real ones on here who interact with my content. Like, I was thinking to do a post-fight reaction to Paulie Malignaggi's BKB fight, but let's be real, it will get like 200 views. Shout out to Paulie for getting the win in that fight though. I took a break from editing this very video to tune into that fight and it was worth it. It was nice to see a 44-year-old Paulie Malignaggi box a guy around with the gloves off, and fair play to him for surviving that 4th round onslaught from Goodjon. Sometimes I will just do an immediate reaction to a fight that's on at normal time here in the UK, even if I know that I won't get any views, because I'll be up till 5 AM with my dick in my hand anyway, so I might as well do a vid on the fight I just watched. But I could be working on a big hit piece in that time, so I might ditch the obscure post-fight vids, not gonna lie. And I was planning on doing a video on something going on in boxing right now in the form of a piece about how the boxing world are reacting to Dana White's Zuffa boxing plans, and I was going to play loads of clips from different interviews of what people in the boxing world had to say about Zuffa boxing because I found it interesting at first. But it is just fair to say that it ain't going to work because the existing boxing belts cannot be replaced by the Zuffa belt, and Dana White robs fighters blind in the UFC and all of this stuff, and it's just Eddie Hearn talking about how excited he is to compete with Dana White and all of this nonsense. He says the same thing in every interview. Eddie Hearn is the main reason that I ain't doing that Zuffa boxing video, to be honest. I am not going back over all of his interviews, fuck that. And then you've got Max Kellerman just glazing Dana White. I think the term glazing is overused these days, mainly by negative-minded people or haters, so to speak. They say, "You're glazing," to make people feel a type of way about complimenting others because they're not happy with their own situation and don't receive compliments themselves. But Max Kellerman on Dana White, that's pure, unadulterated glaze, and it makes me sick to my stomach. So yeah, I'ma leave all of that alone. Oscar De La Hoya's nice and brief Clapback Thursday skit is enough for me. He's going at Dana White the right way. That's why De La Hoya's more base, man. Quick little 3-minute Clapback Thursday. You don't need to do these hour Zoom calls and shit. I guess I'm the mug for having listened to these long interviews over the years, but hey, you can't expect much from me. One of society's rejects, a wise man might say. By the way, this isn't me thinking I'm big and acting like anyone's supposed to care that I'm not looking to make videos on these kind of topics at the minute. No one cares, let's be real. But on the off chance that one or two of you do, I'd say it's worth my time to explain myself to you guys. And my energy and devotion towards boxing is going to stay the exact same, by the way. I just can't be asked for all the drama stuff and doing certain post-fight reactions that just ain't worth the time. So I was going to put the time and energy that I was using for that stuff on some more interesting boxing content. I can spend more time just watching old fights back like I used to do, instead of religiously keeping up with all of those interviews just to find out about all of the boxing news. So yeah, I'm hoping that the BBC can provide some competition for DAZN. Sky Sports Boxing has no promoter right now, so in the UK, the only major broadcasters of boxing other than DAZN are Channel 5, who are with Wasserman Boxing, and now the BBC, who are with Boxer. And Wasserman Boxing is run by the Sauerland brothers, and Kalle Sauerland also works with DAZN, as he co-promotes Misfits or something. You see, everyone's involved in DAZN. Since Queensberry Promotions left TNT Sport and went to DAZN, and Boxer lost their Sky deal, the DAZN monopoly has come very close to being in full effect. By the way, my support is just of healthy competition in boxing broadcasting in the UK all round. I'm not getting behind Boxer, and I'm certainly not getting behind the BBC. But Boxer on BBC specifically, it would be cool to see it be successful. If you say that you're for or against DAZN, you're just talking in terms of boxing, let's be real. But if I say that I'm for the BBC, well, that's a pause first of all, but also, the BBC are always pushing some political narrative in all of their programming, so shit gets techie there.
Alright, just shut up!
I want the competition so much because I just don't want boxing fans to be subjective to extortionate paywalls, and for them to have to hear the same narratives all the time when clicking on a YouTube video or tuning into the radio or whatever. Let's have it right. Aitama vs White pay-per-view in August, Parker vs Wardley pay-per-view in October, 3 weeks after that, Eubank Jr. vs Conor Ben 2 is on pay-per-view, 1 week after that, Yard vs Benavidez is on pay-per-view, then they've got Moses Aitama headlining a card against a yet-to-be-named opponent just 3 weeks after that on December 13th, which I know for a fact is going to be a pay-per-view event based on things that certain people in the mainstream have been saying to sell that card in advance basically. It's ridiculous to charge the fans for all of that. What happened to His Excellency getting rid of the pay-per-view model or whatever? We must have all watched that Ring Magazine interview getting excited for no reason, like a bunch of mugs.
Come on, you know that was an edict and I was excited for no reason. You should have just left it.
I know I based my whole channel around Chris Eubank Jr. vs Conor Ben for the first fight, but my excitement was genuine for that, and the content paid off in terms of views, by my standard of a good amount of views. But let's be real, the rematch is a force. That's why I haven't done any videos on it. I know it was a 2-fight deal all along, but the first fight was the perfect climax to all of the history around it. It don't need to be shoved down our throats again. Why is that rematch a pay-per-view? We've seen them go at it already, and it's not like it's for a title the second time around. They're just having an immediate rematch for no reason. Their dad's rematch came 3 years after the first fight, so the rematch had been brewing, and there was a WBC world title on the line the second time around. That worked. Their son's having an immediate rematch doesn't work at all, which is why they've got to force the build up this time, and I can't even force myself to care about this rematch, I swear. So this video is a bit of a mess, I know. The original video would have been clean and well structured. The video that would have went out if Clark vs TKV was still on for October 25th, but now I've come out of all of this malarkey. The thumbnail was going to be a bit mad for the original video, and I've stuck to the Frank Rowan Devil Horn thing for this thumbnail as well. A little bit risky, one might say, as Frank Rowan is known to sue everyone and their mother, so he might sue me for this thumbnail, who knows.
Sue me for what?
I wanted to throw out a little idea about how Boxer could use the British heavyweight title to carry each of their 4 annual BBC shows, but now that the fight has been postponed, I'm not asked to go into all of that. Maybe I'll talk about it in a reaction video to Fraser Clark vs Jeamie TKV on October 29th, because that is the fight that my focus will be on that night for sure. Look, if you made it this far into the video, then you are a real one. Thanks for that. If that DAZN shit that I was saying made any of you feel a type of way because your favourite YouTuber is DAZN affiliated, then I do apologise. But O.M.E Boxing is your favourite YouTuber's favourite YouTuber, mine? Nah, let me shut up. Please like the video and hype the video, and you have been listening to O.M.E Boxing.